So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
President Donald Trump was inaugurated on January 20th, 2025, promising great change through budget cuts and policy. But are these changes really feasible without equally great damage? In this video, we'll cover what Trump's proposed policies are doing and will do to education and research.
Another thing I'll be doing very early in the administration is closing up the Department of Education in Washington, D.C.
The Department of Education is largely responsible for financial aid. Every year, they help almost 10 million students through higher education by distributing $120.8 billion through FAFSA, grants, and more. As some UW students write, I rely on FAFSA. I don't have any financial support from my family as a refugee. If cuts for scholarships happen in the next year, I will struggle to graduate undergrad. I'm scared I won't be able to stay in school since I am relying on FAFSA. Although Trump wishes to abolish the Department of Education, it is unlikely that all federal student aid will vanish. Trump has not explicitly stated the end of FAFSA, and programs facilitated by the Education Department will likely be transferred to individual states or the Treasury Department. Additionally, grants such as the Pell Grant, Higher Education Act, GI Bill, and Work Study grants are expected to stay regardless of Trump's plans. The Pell Grant is approved by Congress with historically bipartisan support. The HEA predates the Department of Education, making it likely to survive because funds are determined by Congress rather than the DE. During his first term, Trump signed the Forever GI Bill, making the bill more accessible and beneficial to veterans. This makes abolishment during his second term unlikely. Work study grants are also allocated by Congress and have received bipartisan support on Capitol Hill. Whether or not these aids continue, abolishing the DE would disrupt current functions. Data from New America shows that 55% of adults in America oppose abolishment. With the extra context that DE responsibilities would be moved to departments with no previous experience with financial aid, 62% are opposed. Even within Republicans, the greatest percentage is opposed. It is only the beginning of Trump's administration, and only time will tell what happens to the Department of Education and related programs. The Trump administration plans to cut the National Institutes of Health's indirect funding towards crucial medical research. Direct funding includes funds for specific specimen, equipment solely used for the project, and researcher salaries. Indirect funds contribute to maintaining machines, administrative staff salaries, miscellaneous items like printer paper, and more. Top research universities often see indirect costs of over 50%, but new NIH budget cuts plan to lower funding to 15%.
We will not be able to function because we need the infrastructure, we need the staff, we need people to help us put in the grants.
There will be a multitude of cascading effects due to these budget cuts. Staff will be laid off, research will struggle to continue, and every individual that benefits from medical advances will be negatively affected. Those in support of the NIH budget cut argue that private grants often cap indirect cost funding at 10%, and such research does just fine. However, experts point out that federal grants and private grants are like apples and oranges. The structure of these grants are very different, with private grants including a bulk of indirect costs in their direct funding. Others argue that taxpayers should not need to pay for every little thing like printer paper, especially when universities are so wealthy. Dr. David Skorton, president and CEO of the Association of American Medical Colleges, counters that indirect costs are essential to keeping research running. Those in the field would recognize that although each individual indirect need may seem insignificant, the amalgamation of all becomes a great resource. Additionally, the university's funds cannot simply be used freely. The endowments are allocated to specific functions such as education and other university needs. Federal funding for research is incredibly important to furthering American medical science, which provides life-saving care, better diagnoses, and higher standards of living for all. It is important to understand that funding is not just beneficial to researchers, but for everyone who uses medicine. Trump and his administration have made great strides in changing the American political environment, but new policies and budget cuts have come at a great cost to fields like education and research. While the future remains unclear, it is important to be aware of changes, possible outcomes, and ways to leverage your own power. Taking actions such as voting in local elections, participating in protests, and being aware of personal rights can help shape the future you envision.